Welcome, everyone. My name is Joyati Das, and I am leading the Evidence to Action project here at University of Melbourne's Centre for Cities, supported by Swiss philanthropic organization Fondation Botnar. The UN celebrates, as you know, World Cities Day annually on 31st of October to promote better city, better life, calling for cultivating sustainable urban futures. And on World Cities Day, our team, the Evidence to Action team, at Uni Melbourne are hosting a panel discussion on this topic. We want a very easygoing conversation style discussion. And the topic is equitable partnerships for sustainable urban futures for young people, from local to global. Now, we know that critical to promoting sustainable urban futures is evidence-based decision-making that can inform programmatic and policy action. We know this process should involve diverse actors. Every sector, as well as diverse city actors and citizens, need to collaborate if we want to progress livable cities for all. Now, diverse voices from local to global need to be at the table to share their knowledge and lived experiences across the urban landscape. And central to this process of building equitable partnerships is the imperative of inclusion. We keep hearing that, all of us have heard that, the inclusion agenda, easier said than done when we deal with so many cross-cutting complexities, cultural, political, social. So let us get on with our panel discussion. And we'll start with reflections and deliberations on this topic. Now, joining me on this panel today are mayors, city planners, policy and programmers, practitioners, researchers, advocates, activists who have made concerted efforts to build partnerships within their constituencies to promote young people's well-being in different city portfolios. Their efforts provide evidence of progress made towards SDG 17, which calls for global partnerships for sustainable development. Now, a very special guest on our panel today is a youth representative, Esther Mururi, who will listen and respond to our panelists, as well as present her argument for much needed action to accelerate Agenda 2030. So, to get us started, my first speaker is Mayor Oscar Escobar, representing City of Palmira, Colombia. About 360,000 people live in Palmira, the 20th biggest municipality in Colombia. In 2019, Oscar became the youngest mayor of his hometown, and he put forward a plan of action in order for Palmira to go forward in modernity, infrastructure development, and violence prevention. Oscar Escobar is an economist, has a master's in public policy from Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. So, Oscar, I know it is pretty early in Colombia, so thank you for being with us. Can you please speak on the significance of political will of local government actors in fostering equitable partnerships with multi-stakeholders for sustainable development for young people within a city? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, good morning from Colombia. I'm very pleased to be here to be sharing with so many people around the world. And of course, thank you to the University of Melbourne and Botnar Foundation for the invitation. I would like to say that first thing is, in government, even though you're supposed to be the government, there are a lot of governments, a lot of different layers of government. And that makes it difficult when you're about to make an intervention or when you're trying to reach a goal, because every different area has different incentives, has different leaders, has different indicators that they have to comply. And sometimes for them, it's difficult to see the complete forest, let's say, so they focus only in their tree that they have to be accountable for. And that is the importance of the political will. It is, of course, very difficult as a mayor or as a governor or as a president to be on top of everything. There are hundreds of things, thousands of things going on every day. And the kind of job I have had as a mayor is more like a fireman. So you're turning down fires everywhere, and sometimes you miss sight of what is important because you're always on what is urgent, what is on fire right now. But since we develop, in Colombia, we have something that's called development plan. And so it's a document in which we have the priorities for the 4 years. So since we were writing that document that you have to do really in the first 2 months of being elected, of being sworn in, since that moment, we decided that our violence prevention strategy would have this multi-stakeholder approach, and that it would not be only the responsibility of a security secretariat, of our social secretariat, but it was going to have different goals for different areas, and it was going to be an intervention that we were going to in which we were going to prioritize the most affected neighborhoods and the most affected population, which was the youth. So being able to plan that ahead helped us then align the incentives when the execution time came, because now every area knew that they have an indicator that was correspondent to this strategy and that they have to align themselves to do it. And of course, that is one of the things that we have been monitoring since my office with like special advisor with a special approach, and is how do we make this strategy that is called Pasos, that helped us to win the UCLG Peace Prize last year, how do we make it better? It's never perfect, not even today, but we're always trying to get better at it. And we started, I have to say, with a top-down approach, especially also because when we started the government in 2020, 3 months in, the pandemic came, so it was really difficult to think about a participatory approach when you are locked down. But then when we started the implementation and we started to find people in the neighborhoods and different also organizations, then that helped us to improve our strategy. And that is another layer of the multi-stakeholder approach, because then, I mean, it is hard enough to articulate your own government, your own people. But now what really has made us successful is being able to work with the business sector, for example, which after a huge crisis that we have with a social strike here in Colombia, especially in the Valle del Cauca region where I am, they decided to invest in helping young people study, helping young people find jobs. And so we articulated that to our already running strategy that helped us create, I mean, it helped them gain legitimacy because we have been already working on the ground, and it helped us win a lot of money that we didn't have to implement these programs. So that is a big example. Also with the international cooperation, like Fondation Botnar, who really strives for working for sustainable mobility, and especially with young people. So we were able also to articulate those programs with our big umbrella, because our strategy, Pasos, is like an umbrella in which many programs are working besides each other in the same territories with the same focus, with the same message. So that has always been, that has really been very important for us. Also finding grassroots organizations who were already working on, I mean, they didn't call it violence prevention, but in the end, it was that, right? It was building cohesion in their neighborhoods. It was giving opportunities to people. So even the church, the Catholic Church, right? So like we have things in common in Colombia, of course, and the state, it has to be a guarantee of every religion. But you can find in the religious communities the defense for life, right? And the defense for life is also against violence, and it's also pro a more peaceful coexistence. So we have been able to find what we have in common with many of these organizations in order to work with the strategy, and I think that has been key for our city's success.
Thank you so much for that really passionate and very much honest opinion about your journey of taking the reins of Palmyra for the last 4 years, Oscar. And for us, it's what is resonating with me, what I've written is I like your fireman approach, that reactive rather than strategic. But then you got all these different kind of sectors together, youth with their innovation and ideas, but the business sector is what I'm hearing came together, gave you legitimacy and resources. And what ultimately happened with this umbrella organization is really pulling together the messages of peace, which is then an outcome is then addressing the violence. That is something that has been an issue that you have taken so seriously. Thank you so much. I'll bring you back again later on, but let me now invite our second speaker. Our second speaker is Juan Carlos Munoz Mora. He's a professor in development economics at Universidad EFIT in Colombia. He's passionate about evidence-based approaches to inform policy decisions and drive positive change. Juan Carlos is the monitoring and evaluation lead for the multi-country program Safe and Sound Cities, funded by Fondation Botnar. Juan Carlos, welcome. I'd like to ask you, what is the value and importance of young people and their perspectives in co-designing local initiatives and contributing to evidence-building processes in order to drive change in their cities?
Hello, morning to everybody, and thanks again for the invitation. Thanks, Jyoti, for building these spaces to discuss about the importance of building evidence for making the action. I guess your question is, in our program, as you said, we are the global partner of a program that is present in now 4 countries, 6 different cities, and we are reaching so far more than 4,000 people, young people that has been involved in the intervention and in the different action in the project. And one of the key points that we have discovered in this journey was that to actually understand what is the participatory approach from the young population. So what actually means passing from a passive participation into co-building and co-design with the young partners. And that part for us as a project, but also as a researcher, has been a key factor for moving on and to actually building actions, building evidence with the young population. So what we have seen before in the initial year in our program is that was really easy for everybody saying that we are co-building, co-designing, and co-evaluating with young people. But when we were actually checking what are the level of participation for the young population was not that high, and that is a quite frequent problem in this project, that the way that we are building but that we are including the young population in our projects are sometimes so it's just a semantic approach to say we are a participatory, but we are not actually putting their decisions at their positions into the project from the perspective and from the action. And just listen, Oscar, the mayor of Palmira, I guess this kind of one of the things that he said that I really like it there is that one of the success in Palmira was the possibility to actually co-build with businessmen, but also with the young population, incorporating them into the questions. So from my perspective, building with young population is in these kind of projects has been again the key element for actually understanding what are the actual problem and actually to co-build the solution with them. And one of the things that we realize is that putting young people to think with us about how to measure, how to make, how to build these approaches allows to start building capacity as we were building evidence. So, and the young population were understanding that the evidence was the key factor to moving for the action. So basically at the end, and this is the way that I like to imagine these approaches, is that we use evidence as a capacity building actions to make the action happens, because that is the way that the young population is able to um, to actually to get some sustainability and actually engage into the intervention. And perhaps the most important part of co-building and co-designing with young population is that when you are putting this level of engagement into the program, you guarantee that life actually change for them, because they realize that they are actually able to build. Again, this is like a common place to say, let's co-build, let's do that. That is not easy, of course. That builds many challenges from the program manager, but also, I mean, in the different layers of the program. Just building this kind of approaches happens is difficult, because you need to build like young friendly instruments, young friendly approaches that they are saying that I'm listening to you, but actually I'm gonna show you that what I'm learning from you, I'm gonna apply in the intervention. So something that we have learned so far is that given them also not only the places for participate, but also tools to make this action happen, was a really important measure for us. In our program, for instance, we build two strategies for making this co-building and to co-action happens. First, we build a toolkit in which we co-build with the young population and say, look, you're gonna have a toolkit to boost your interventions, to boost your participatory action, to boost your placemaking in the different actions with the different stakeholders in the local partners. In this toolkit that we are building together, you can see what we have learned in the different geographies that makes this co-building and this co-action happens. And the second strategy that has been really useful for us is try to use technology in all of these interactions. Specifically, we are implementing some strategy using artificial intelligence in three main dimensions. First, as a data collection strategy, and then that connect immediately with the young languages. Second, as a data analysis, and third, as a learning strategy. Again, that was our approach, just to give them back the power from the intervention. You could build, but also you are able to, with you and with these tools, you are empowered of your intervention and basically and going to the main challenge of our intervention, that actually is change the systematic change in the life of the young population that participate in our program, but also in the cities where they live. That I guess this is the main challenge and the main opportunity that brings the new context for that.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. This was really fantastic to hear, your lived experience, because I know that you've gone through a journey, and we all talk about youth participation and empowerment. All those words are very much development kind of, a whole lot of basket of words we use. But what does it entail? And you're saying meaningful, genuine participation is actually a journey that you have to work with young people to understand their perspectives, what makes sense to them, their capacities to engage at their level. And so bringing in technology, keeping them engaged and meeting them at their level is so important. And for what I'm hearing is, and this is the way you've given the power back to them, rather than dictating how they bring what we can extract from them. So thanks very much for your a very insightful explanation and insightful kind of reflections on this point. Staying in Latin America, staying there, let me bring Daniel Uribe. from Fundación Corona. Daniel is executive director of Fundación Corona, a family foundation that has worked for social development in Colombia for more than 5 decades. In this role, he has promoted systemic approaches to addressing social problems and promoted collective impact around Fundación Corona's prioritized agendas, and that's citizen engagement and education for employment. Fundación Corona drives collaborative, programmatic, and policy action from local to national level in Colombia. So, Daniel, welcome. Can I ask you to reflect on the value of building alliances and fostering multi-sectoral cooperation to promote knowledge exchange and collaboration for policy action for the good, for common good, and of course, livable cities for all, especially young people?
Thank you, Jayati. Thank you to you, and it's an honor to be here with all of you, also for Fondation Botnar. Well, as you mentioned, Fundación Corona has been working over almost 6 decades in Colombia trying to promote social development, and we have always understood that to address social issues, we have to have a systemic approach. And with starting with a systemic approach, you have to understand that it's a multi-stakeholder type of solution, because most of the social issues have to be addressed from the different perspective of the different stakeholders. One of the key topics that we have learned in this journey is how to promote participation within the cities. One of our programs, our leading programs, is Ciudades Como Vamos. How Are We Doing City is a program that has been working over 25 years in Colombia. It's already been replicated in more than 20 cities within Colombia and 80 cities around the region, and represents, just to give you an idea, 60% of the GDP of the country. What we have started there is to understand which stakeholders have to be included to actually promote better citizenship engagement. So it has to be the private sector. It's very important to have the academia. It's very relevant to have the social or third sector, and also very relevant to have the media. So every Como Vamos movement is a place-based multi-stakeholder that has to include those 4 actors to actually monitor the quality of life, understanding the hard data, what is happening at the quality data, but also what's happening at the perception. As the Major was mentioning, and as Juan Carlos was mentioning, I think those 2 topics are very, very relevant to monitor and to support the decision-making of the city from the private sector, but also from the public sector. This opportunity has given us a sense in how we can monitor the development of the cities. When we're talking about youth, we have been able to promote 2 tools. Like 8 years ago, we started working with the Social Progress Index as one of the tools to promote equity, to understand the development of the cities much more than only the economic sector. But then we say, let's build something that has been started globally, and it's the Youth Progress Index. So we were able to test how the Youth Progress Index in Medellin and in Cali, in some cities within Colombia, were addressing the needs of the youth at the different stakeholders. But it was very relevant to promote this type of advocacy, once again, to have the different stakeholders getting the data. Because what we have realized is this type of hard data or quality data, being perception or hard data, help us build awareness. What are the problems? What is hurting to the city, and what are the main topics that has to be influenced by the different stakeholders to start putting focus in some agendas? Of course, quality of life, and as you have mentioned, well-being and relational well-being is a multi-dimensional topic, but we have to understand which topics have to be moved within the advocacy of the different stakeholders. That's as one of the examples. The second example, close to Palmira, or where the Major is, we have been working in Jumbo with something that we think is also very relevant at the multi-stakeholder partnership for advocacies. Let's promote public leadership. We were talking about public goods, and we believe in Fundación Corona that we have to start changing the mindset of leadership. For many years, leadership has been seen as a one-person task. And we understand to change the point of view, we have to understand as a collective leadership approach, and a collective leadership that is focused into the public goods, into the public well-being. And in that sense, we have been able to promote through one of the models that we have developed that is more participation or participa más, is to understand advocacy, public leadership, and open government together. And in public leadership, it has been very interesting to put different stakeholders, once again, private sector, the youth, local leaders, to understand what are the demand topics. And as the major one saying, one of the topics in the region, in the Valle del Cauca, has been security and opportunities for youth. And in that sense, we were able to have this group stay together and build a youth policy for security issues in Palmira. But they have been not top-down, saying from the government what they wanted, but much more bottom-up in a collective approach, understanding how we can actually understand a policy built on hard data, but also built on evidence, as you were talking on the evidence to action, Juan Carlos was mentioning, what could work, what has been working to bring solutions that could be actually be delivered at the municipality level. And last but not least, one third example, trying to bring a little bit national and regional wise experience in Colombia, is one program that we're also working with you and with Botnar Foundation in Barranquilla. In Barranquilla, we have the opportunity to put the youth at the center. Barranquilla is the third largest city in Colombia, and it has 25% of youth. And we have to understand how to build once again trust. Trust is one of the main components because Barranquilla has been growth a lot, but we have to understand what is trust between the youth and the development of the city and the future vision of a city. And we have the opportunity to have two main programs in Barranquilla, both of them funded and supported by Fondation Botnar, and is Our Cities, Nuestra Barranquilla, and the second one is the Global Opportunity Youth Network Barranquilla. And those two approaches, we started building something that Juan Carlos was saying, and I think it's very relevant, is start having a participatory approach, start hearing the youth. So we were able to build a participatory diagnostic with over 1,000 youth from the different sectors of Barranquilla, but also we included more than 100 stakeholders to understand what is happening for the youth. How can we use that type of information to actually start building a vision of a better city, including the voice of the youth, including the opportunities. At the current stage, that started last year, at the current stage, what we have been able is to identify which were the entry points within our city initiative, mental well-being, employment, entrepreneurship, cultural development, some topics that have to be addressed for the youth and for the future of the city. And they were able to build what we call the youth mandate. This youth mandate includes all the voices of the youth and is being used in advocacy, once again to your question. Now we have current elections this month in Colombia at the local level, and they're trying to use all this hard data built at the different stages from different stakeholders to actually have a better conversation, a much more open conversation. So giving you these three examples, I just wanted to close with something that we think is very relevant to have this type of partnerships and advocacy. First is to understand the data and the information and how it has to be from quality data into solutions and quantity data into awareness, and how we can have a larger conversation to see a perspective of the city, but having all the different stakeholders in understanding is a systemic approach. Second, the evidence to action framework has been very, very helpful for us to understand this is a dynamic situation. We have to understand what is happening, and from planning to the development and deployment, we have to have different iterations at different moments, and to understand this is a living information decision making. But the more evidence we have, the more we start changing the system, the more we influence also in positive solutions that could be addressed and inspire different stakeholders. And third, but not least, if it's not a public good you were mentioning, if it's not shared, we will not able to actually share and influence the different stakeholders and the different units. So it's very, very relevant for us from the Como Vamos, the Barranquilla initiative, always to make all the data available, always thinking who are the users of the data. who will want to get this data to make better decision making and to understand this should be a public good. And if we start making changes in Palmyra, the mayor was saying, in Medellin, but also global wise with the safe and sound system, probably will start making more influence and larger scale at these problems that we're trying to address that are in a large scale type of issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I don't even know where to start to, just, kind of consolidate some of your points. But what I'm hearing is, I'm just amazed to hear the way there is a common theme, the way you guys have mobilized different sectors for this driving these equitable partnerships. So you have the social sector with the local officials, with the youth there, private sector and media, the importance of media. The messaging to the public is so important. We tend to leave them behind. To have them as an ally is going to be so important because their messaging is so critical for the positive kind of influence you want to have and bring people on board. But then the change of mindset, we always think, as you're saying, that the leader is one person, but it's actually not. It's a mindset of leadership is a collective, group, and that needs to be influenced. Building trust comes as a common theme as well. Trust is what young people are saying. Trust us. We have knowledge. We bring information. We bring experience. And the most important, of course, is this bringing evidence, data-driven solutions, and informing that, raising awareness to inform policy. But most commonly, what we forget is sharing this experience and this data with others, with all the city stakeholders. And that's where equitable partnerships becomes so important, that everyone has the right to information. All right. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that very, very insightful, but also really rich information that you're sharing of your own, the programs that you're leading. So now my fourth speaker is to talk to our fourth speaker. We have to move continents. We have to fly to Asia. So my fourth speaker is Kalpana Vishwanath. Kalpana is the co-founder and CEO of SafetyPin, a social enterprise that uses technology and data to advocate for safe urban spaces for girls and women in more than 25 cities in India and globally. And this is a great segue then to build on what Daniel has been talking about, the data-driven policy and advocacy. Kalpana serves on various UN committees to promote gender mainstreaming and equity. She has led research studies on safer cities for girls and women in cities across the world. So welcome to you, Kalpana.
Thank you.
The question we have for you is, what is the role of technology? We've heard a little bit from Danielle. What is the role of technology in empowering youth to co-produce knowledge that fuels advocacy at the local and national level? You have much to share with us with your work through SafetyPin. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I have really learned a lot from the speakers before me. I would like to, before jumping into technology, I think speaking from India and the work that we've done currently in India, I think it's very important to state that 50% in the Indian population is below 25 years of age. 65% of the Indian population is below 35 years of age. So we are talking about a very, very large section of the country when we are looking at the issues of young people and youth. And I think along with that, the reality that many of these young people also live with in deprived communities, in low resource communities. They live in urban poverty, in rural poverty. So when we look at the issues of young people, in India, it is sometimes has a very it can have a very different dimension, and I can see this come out in quite a few of the examples, especially in Colombia. And SafetyPin has been privileged to actually work in Colombia, in Bogota earlier as well. So we did an exercise, when we started this project called Cities for Youth with the Fondation Botnar, and we said, what do young people want from cities? We said we tried to do it from the perspective of young people. Say, what is it that you want from cities? Not just what is it that you, in terms of rights, expectations, entitlements. And they came up, and we had these design workshops with nearly 400 young people in one of the states in India. And we came up with some very interesting findings, which we tried to put together. And what they're saying is, and we used, in this technology, we used, SafetyPin has several apps for collecting data from users, from citizens, from women, from young people. And we came up with this idea, with this sort of framework where they said they want to live with rights, they want to grow with pride. So living with rights was really on entitlements as a citizen of the country, which could be from things like having bank accounts to accessing, electoral, whatever. As a citizen of the country, you have a right, because the Indian government has many schemes, even for accessing employment, etc. They said they wanted to grow with pride and dignity. So they wanted work, they wanted employment, they wanted jobs. And that's a very, very big thing. I think many organizations in India are struggling with is the lack of enough jobs with dignity for young people where they can see something as they're moving forward. They also said they wanted to move around without fear, especially young women. Young women face a lot of violence, discrimination as they're moving around the city. So they said we want to grow, to move without fear. And the final thing is that they wanted to play without restriction. So the access to leisure, the access to sport. So as young people, we were getting a range of things where they were talking about what they defined as urban well-being and urban dignity. Now, in that process, how do we, one of the speakers talked about, building capacity as you build evidence. And I liked that because this is exactly what we've done. We've worked with these young people to build the evidence about their lives. And as they were doing that evidence building, that exercise in itself was an empowering exercise, because they began to articulate what they were saying. They began to recognize that they have the right to ask their city government for these things. Otherwise it was sort of in a vacuum. Oh, we don't have work, we don't have a bank account, we don't have access to good playgrounds. But it was not being articulated as their right. If we will look at it, their right to the city actually entails their rights, to well-being. So I think that's what we found very exciting. And I would like to share that, as part of the project, we have built some technology tools around this live, move, grow, play framework that we've designed, where we are both getting young people's input on how they perceive the city, but also sharing the resources that are available. Because one of the things we found that a lot of information is there in the public domain, but it's very difficult to access it. So you can say, okay, education schemes, India, and you go to Google and you will just get lost. You will have no idea where to go. So we're also trying to say, how do you package information? How do you use technology to package information in ways that young people can use? Because, today there's too much information, but there's not that much information that is usable, that is easy to use, that is accessible, say, to a young person who is maybe not even, I wouldn't say semi-literate, but neo-literate. She's the first person in her family who's been to university. So she doesn't have the cultural capital of support from her parents, which many of us take for granted, that they will tell us which university to go to, what we would do for our children. So I think recognizing that, as well as the fact that, urban poor, most of the young people in our cities are in the urban poor, because most of our cities are made up of the urban poor. I think we need to recognize these issues, and these are common across, I think, even Latin America, in several Asian countries and African countries. So again, we went back to the young people, and I think it's important to see everyone uses technology, but everyone doesn't necessarily have access to enough technology. For example, in India, we do have a digital gender divide. So there may be one smartphone in the family, but it's not necessary that everyone currently has a smartphone in their hand. It's no doubt increasing, and in the next 10 years, probably it will be there. Governments are giving it as well, and so I think people are recognizing it. But what we found, for example, during COVID, because school education moved online, even girls were given the access to a computer or a tablet or a phone for 2 hours a day. So it began to change the dynamic within the family, where girls also began to have access to technology. So I think technology can be an enabler, but we must be conscious of the digital divide that still exists in many of our countries. In India, the access to internet is not as much as a divide, but I know it is there in many countries where it is very expensive to access the internet. Now, when we did some work in South Africa, we found that, access to internet is extremely expensive. So I think we need to keep in mind all these things. Otherwise, what we will do is we will create another level of inequality for those people who have access, for those young people who can access these public goods. And I like the word of public goods. But again, how do we ensure that the most excluded, those voices who are the most marginalized, get access to these public goods, entitlements, rights, and urban well-being?
Thank you, Kalpana. I mean, this is exactly what you've done for decades in the country. That's what you're presenting and summarizing. Really, what we are hearing is, it's interesting that you're saying that, building capacity as we build evidence is resonating Juan Carlos's words. That is itself an empowering process for young people. And that's where they start to think about their rights. They start to realize what are their entitlements. And then they're able to, as this trust is built, because they've been given the power by adults to say, you build evidence together with us, then they start to speak their mind. And we see that as a experience, many who are really embedding the evidence to action framework, where we are, saying co-design, review, co-act with young people. It is becoming, it is an enabler. Evidence building is an enabler, is a capacity building process. But what is also is what information that they gather and they get. There's such a dump of information. I really like your point. What information is useful for young people? And we don't tend to think, adult world doesn't tend to think from that perspective, what is useful for them. We decide what is useful for them, and that needs to be unpacked, I think. And then access to the digital divide is really the elephant in the room, and that needs to be, that's the advocacy that we need to engage with our governments. Thanks, Kalpana, for your experience and sharing your work in India. I'm going to move on now to, let me bring in Roy Chiti, who is many years with UN Habitat, and we have worked together on many platforms and work. Roy is UN Habitat's coordinator of the Andean region and UN representative for Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, and Venezuela. He has a degree in urban planning and a master's in development and international aid. Roy has served in several technical and policy roles at UN Habitat, including a key role during the drafting process of the document New Urban Agenda launched at Habitat 3. Roy, welcome. Thank you for coming in during your time off. We would like to ask you, this is a really good, again, connecting kind of question from Kalpana's experience and the work she's doing with Safety Pin is, what is the role then of UN and other multilaterals in supporting young people's right to the city and strengthening their influence in shaping local and global policies? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Gioiati. Good morning to you, and good evening, I guess, and good morning for the colleagues in Latin America. Thanks to you and to the organizers, both the University of Melbourne and the Botnar Foundation, with whom we are working in several initiatives as UN Habitat. Let me start from the big picture. So we all know that the United Nations is an intergovernmental organization, which means that eventually the decisions are made by the member states, no? And they are the ones to adopt resolutions and to take decisions. However, the participation has been increasing in the last decades from various groups of the societies, and stakeholders are more and more engaged in their processes, especially when it comes to the development pillar. And there is therefore an increasing understanding that youth is an important resource for development, of course, in the domain of social change, economic growth, technology, etc. They are key. They are key, and therefore we need to engage more with them. And since just to talk about the mechanisms that at the UN level are present for the engagement of youth, we have since the 1992 and following that year, strengthened by several General Assembly resolutions, we have the Major Group for Children and Youth, which is a mechanism, self-organized mechanism to uphold the rights and ensure meaningful participation of youth and in the UN processes, no? This is open to all youth below the 30 years of age. At UN Habitat, we have a similar mechanism. We have the Youth Advisory Board that you, Gioiati, know very well. There are 12 members that are selected at the international level, and they are supposed to advise us on the program of work and our strategies to ensure that there is a perspective from the youth that is incorporated in our work. Well, a little bit more about UN Habitat as part of this introduction. So our mandate is to contribute in making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. This is the goal 11 of the Agenda 2030. And also we are conscious that there are a number of relevant urban dimensions that are also incorporated in many other SDGs, no? So our role is to contribute with our expertise and with our experience and to advance on that. And as you mentioned, we are led by the new urban agenda, a UN document that was adopted in 2016 that will be valid until 2036, when a new document will be adopted. So this is done every 20 years. And the new urban agenda is the first, although we are still talking about soft law, so it is not a binding document, introduces the right to the city for all, no? Which incorporate this concept of living, enjoying, and making cities that allow a full and equal access to rights, services, and opportunities, all in a package that is considered to be what we call the urban advantage. And the new urban agenda reaffirms that urban regulations, policies, and plans need to be reflective of the reality affecting young people. And talks also about their participation in decision making, which should be a priority, including in all steps of planning, implementation, and follow up. We have heard from other speakers today coming from the region where my office is a region, is a continent of youth population. So the youth are an important part of the population, of the demography of this region, and unfortunately, this is a region where what we call the demographic dividend or the youth dividend has not been leveraged. On the contrary, youth are always seen as the visualization of the problems of this region because of the high unemployment, because of them being involved often in the periods of crisis, in demonstrations, etc. So often they are seen as a problem, and this doesn't allow to really address these issues and involve them in co-creating the solutions that can be found. In Colombia, for instance, where the office is based, we are now also, thanks to the work that we are doing together with the Botnar Foundation in the city of Armenia, we are starting to engage more and more with a framework that since 2019 is present in Colombia, which is the Youth Citizenship Statute. So this is a regulatory framework that promotes the right of youth, and in the country, thanks to this framework, there are municipal, departmental, and national councils, youth councils, that can act as mechanisms for participation, consultation, control of public management, and actually to strengthen the dialogue with the public institutions and this social group, also on territorial issues. We are although it's a very young mechanism that has been introduced. So the law is of the 2018, but many municipalities and departments in the provinces of Colombia, they don't have a fully functioning council. But we believe that this could be an interesting and useful mechanism, to ensure this dialogue with the public administrations and to be these engines of participatory governance. And through the young game changer initiative, which is this initiative jointly with the Botnar Foundation, we have now started in Armenia, which is an intermediate city in Colombia. We are working with them with the goal to advance urban health and well-being of young people, engaging them in local government, with the local governments and the youth governance and urban planning process. Just like this initiative, we have other initiatives, Youth 2030, Sister Neighborhood Program, and then Inclusive Cities Community of Solidarity programs. These are all programs that work especially at the local level. So with the strong implementation at the neighborhood level, especially in poor neighborhoods, and where we usually focus on a set of tools and instruments. So One is the one that relates to the participatory policy making and review, so engaging youth, young people alongside with other stakeholder groups in policy review to ensure that these policies are inclusive and they allow access to the right to the city for all. Then we do participatory assessments and data collection, especially at the neighborhood level, no, to really provide evidences to the decision making. Then we work on public space, participatory design and interventions. We use digital tools like the Minecraft video game. We do tactical urbanism with them, with traffic pacification, muralization, wall painting with artists. And then we work strengthening community centers with bottom-up initiatives through exchange of experience and networking, involving youth, always with this idea of co-building, and Juan Carlos mentioned that, co-building, these are the keywords, co-designing, co-creation of solution, and always ensuring a maximal level of inclusion of all. Thanks.
Thank you, Roy. That was such a comprehensive kind of mapping that you presented, that all the global kind of frameworks and tools that are present and that are being applied at the local level. And I'm glad we've got mayors and we've got other social, influencing policy sector people. We've got academia here to hear about what the range of kind of programs and tools that you have, and you're applying that at a local level. So on that note, let me invite Esther Mururi to our who is our youth representative on this panel, to discuss and to respond to all the different panel speakers. It'll be nice to hear. It'll be interesting to hear her thoughts. Let me introduce you to Esther. Esther is, as I said, our youth representative. She is serving on the steering committee of the Local 2030 Coalition for SDG Localization, which is co-chaired by UN Habitat and UNDP. Now, this is a governing body of the coalition and provides strategic leadership and governance, oversight, reviewing the results from the Local 2030 Coalition Secretariat. Now, Esther, in other kind of the work that she's doing and she's been leading, is the founder of the Gold Ribbon Initiative, a youth-led nonprofit organization committed to advocating for well-being of children living with cancer in Kenya. She's also got extensive experience implementing disaster risk reduction and humanitarian response programs in Kenya. Esther has been involved in stakeholder policy engagement in the country and globally. She's contributed to the policy process of SDGs, other UN frameworks on disaster risk reduction, climate change, humanitarian affairs, and sustainable urban development. I have seen Esther in many different platforms talking passionately about the work she's been doing. Esther, welcome. We are so happy to have you. I believe you are, of course, working very closely with local communities, as well as you have a formal role and a seat to influence decision makers, contribute and shape global agendas. My question to you is, are you hopeful? Can you reflect on the weight of including young people's voices, their aspirations in framing and shaping policies local to global? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jayati. Good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon where I am, but good afternoon to the mayor. I believe he's in a different time zone, which is quite early in the morning. So let me start by saying thank you so much for having me speak during this event. It's timely and it shows that the space for young people is still there, and that we still have spaces where our voice can be heard. I usually reflect on this question about this if I'm still hopeful, and my answer is Yes. And I will say yes, and I will share a little bit about my story. When Kalpana was speaking, I could see myself in her story when she was saying, okay, maybe this young person is the first person to graduate in their family. And yes, that's me. And I grew up in a rural place until I was, like a teenager when I started experiencing the city life. And at that point is when I started realizing how different cities were from my life that I had in the rural areas. And at that point, I have always been very curious and very active in public debates or rather public spaces where I can influence policies or I can influence things for the better of the community. And I joined different youth networks and youth groups, championed mobilization of young people to take action in their communities, especially around environment work, humanitarian work, but also on cities. And one of the things I usually reflect on, and I see a lot of hope, is that there are still spaces, there are still people who actually listen when young people speak. And that was my case when I started engaging within the policy work. Back in 2015, I joined a global volunteer network of young people called the UNMGC1, which is a United Nations Global Major Group for Children and Youth. Is one of the mechanisms that is organized, self-organized mechanism for different groups, including children and youth, to engage within the UN processes. And when I started working in this global network of young people, I started realizing that there is space and it does not require special skills for people to engage in this space. It only requires for enabling environment. And I think that has been spoken very widely by the preceding speakers. There enabling environment for young people to participate and contribute in policy making processes. And I think this is one of the spaces where UN system created for young people to engage. And I still think that is a place that still needs to be preserved. Moving from global also, it's also at that time I was getting more involved in the cities. Now I live in Nairobi. It's my city now. And I started engaging and knocking doors of the county government to understand what city programs are there, how can young people take part in them. And I remember I was still at the university doing my bachelor's. And this is where I realized that there was a youth department within the ministry that is specifically dealing with the work of young people and engaging young people. And when I knocked on their door, one of the questions was, or one of the response I got from the person was, we never get to see young people come to us. And this goes back to the question about how much information is available out there about what is existing for young people, right? So for me, I was like, okay, I actually didn't know this existed, but because I was so curious to know what is there within the government system to create a space for us to engage, I ended up in this space. And this is the time when we started engaging very closely also with the UN Habitat Children and Youth Unit. And we drafted the first concept and we did a joint partnership between the county government of Nairobi, the Ministry of Youth of Kenya, and also the UN Habitat and the Kenya Red Cross then, to bring young people to speak about, for the first time, to bring young people to speak about urban issues in Kenya. And we were able to produce the first declaration on youth, Nairobi Youth Declaration on urban development, sustainable urban development. And From this process, we were able to create more space for youth to be recognized within the government spaces. And it's at this point then we were able to have to establish like permanent seats within the National Habitat Committee, which is chaired by the State Department for Housing. And it has membership from the government, from the UN Habitat, and all other actors involved in the urban agenda. And from this process, I got to also participate in several discussions at different levels. And I remember it was at this point when the new urban agenda was being developed, and then it was approved in Quito. And then we had to come back to Nairobi and sit down as a National Habitat Committee to discuss, okay, what next now that we have this global framework. So at this point, the ministry or the committee was very keen to hear about the voices and the thoughts and ideas of young people. And I remember during the global process, we were quite vocal in Quito, and we developed strong contributions and policy interventions around how we want young people to be engaged in the next 20 years of the new urban agenda. And when we returned back to Kenya, that's when we were also invited as ECO, and this brings me back to the topic of today, ECO Partnership for Sustainable Futures. We were included as ECO partners to develop the first new urban agenda popular version for Kenya, which actually Kenya was the first government to actually popularize or develop a domesticated version of the new urban agenda. And when I look back at that process, I feel very proud, not only of myself, but also of the people who are in those spaces, because for me, I feel like one of the key enablers of this process or inclusion is also to ensure that you have the mechanisms that was spoken about before, like how can you ensure that young people have access to mechanisms, to tools that can make them participate in the policy processes. And for me, having a permanent seat, the young people having a permanent seat at the National Habitat Committee is one of the mechanisms and tools which enable young people to continuously engage in this discussion. Over and above that, also my role also at the Local 2030 Coalition, I have to say it's an honor and a pleasure to sit in that governance process as a youth representative. It's also how can I say it also makes me remember or reflect on a quote a friend of mine likes to say quite a lot when he talks about youth engagement. He talks about if you're not on the table, you're probably on the menu. And we young people don't want to be in the menu, they want to be on the table. And I feel like the creation of Local 2030 Coalition with a seat for young people, it also contributes to equitable partnerships and recognizing that young people do have, they do have capacity and they can contribute to policy processes effectively. And we are moving away from the eras where people would sit in a boardroom and decide for young people what is best for them. But now we are creating the space where we are inviting young people and making them understand that this is their space and they can be able to contribute equally as everyone else. And for me, for the last 2 years within the steering committee, it has been important because I could be able to, I see the reception of my opinions and ideas from the board and how they are easily accepted. And also being able to influence a global process in terms of how can young people be engaged further as we talk about accelerating the implementation of the SDGs at the local level. Thank you.
Esther, thank you so much for that. Really, I must say that it started with your own personal journey of being empowered to engage right from the beginning. And, congratulations for being the first person. I'm sure there are many, many more in your family who are now graduating, but you led the path and showed them what is possible. For me, I think what is resonating is what you are saying and what other panel members have been speaking about. It is about, you found, no one came to you. You found the opportunities. You were opportunity driven. You went to the government departments and you talk to them about how can you contribute. And that's one, that you didn't have enough information. That's what you found, that lack of information. But also, why do people, what I'm hearing is young people are not able to engage at the local level. And of course, Oscar's here. And, I just want to, talk about, I think, something that we need to think about as panelists who are working in different leadership roles in different sectors, is this lack of trust between the world and young people. And it's becoming wider and wider. They don't feel confident to, they don't feel enabled. They don't feel empowered. And we're hearing that. But we are also hearing from Roy, we've heard that. From, of course, Daniel, we've heard, and we've heard it from Juan Carlos in his role as an M&E lead at the Safe and Sound Cities, as well as Oscar at Palmyra, Mayor of Palmyra, talking about how they creatively created participatory approaches, brought enabled young people to come and connect and got them to feel valued. And that is a responsibility that we have as leaders of diverse sectors. On that note, I actually would like to thank you again. I'll bring, as we close, a couple of people back, but I have with me colleague and someone we work together. I work together with is Catherine Scurfield, who is an associate director at Equitable UK. She currently acts as the program director and monitoring evaluation learning lead for the Healthy Cities for Adolescents Phase 2. It's a multi-country program funded by Fondation Botnar. And Catherine is experienced in monitoring evaluation approaches and implementing projects across a range of social policy areas throughout East Africa and Southeast Asia. What is interesting about her program, Catherine, I know you guys have been doing a lot of work. Healthy Cities for Adolescents program strategy promotes consortium building to implement projects in intermediary cities. Can I ask you to reflect on consortium building and the realities of addressing power relations across different levels of operations within multi-country programs? And welcome, I know you've been in a training program, so thank you very much for making time to join us. So over to you, Catherine.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me, and apologies I couldn't be here for the whole day because the discussions sound really interesting. And hello to everyone, it's very nice to meet you. Yes, as Jayati mentioned, I'm Catherine Scurfield, and I am the program director and monitoring and evaluation and learning lead for the Healthy Cities for Adolescents program. And as Jayati mentioned, HCA is a multi-year initiative that works in 6 different countries across Latin America and Asia. We work in Ecuador, Colombia, Ghana, Senegal, India, and Vietnam. And our overall aim is to promote the health and well-being of adolescents in urban settings. We work in intermediary cities. We have currently 7 active projects that deliver activities in a wide range of health and well-being areas. So sexual reproductive health, nutrition, urban space revitalization, mental health, and all have a policy and advocacy focus as well. They also work in cross-cutting themes of the program. So they all work towards harnessing digital technology, promoting equity and inclusion, and very importantly, meaningful youth participation. As Jayati mentioned, our projects all deliver in a consortium. We don't fund a single organization, although there is a lead partner that's responsible for the overall delivery. So coming to the topic of the day, for me anyway, which is what is a consortium and why is it important in the context of HCA2? And there's a whole power dynamics thing that Jayati mentioned that's quite interesting. So, the definition of a consortium is at least a group of individuals, two or more companies, governments, a group of stakeholders that work together to achieving a common objective. And really in the international development setting in particular, working in a consortium is increasingly seen as a key to successful delivery of implementing activities, particularly when you have an aim of creating systemic change in addressing shared global challenges. And that is really an ambition of HCA2, is to catalyze systemic change. And multi-stakeholder partnerships are, of course, important vehicles for mobilizing and sharing knowledge and expertise, technologies, and I think a lot of people will tell you financial resources to support achievements of the SDGs in particular in all countries. And as I mentioned, working in consortia is vital in catalyzing systems change and promoting multi-sectoral collaboration. It's a way to foster city-level engagement and create partnerships between communities, the local government, private sector, civil society, and beyond. And very importantly, this type of collaboration can result in higher profiles and greater impact of initiatives, the development of innovative approaches, and really a more rapid circulation of ideas. But there's always a cost in working in a consortium in terms of resources, time, and collaboration doesn't always ensure equity in partnership. And this is really something that we're learning in the HCA program. So, how do we try to promote consortium in the HCA2 program? Well, the notion of working in consortium has always been a key aim of HCA, dating back to its inception in phase 1. So Chorus didn't lead phase 1, it was another organization. But from the outset in the design, lead organizations were always strongly encouraged to build partnerships in the design and implementation of their activities. And actually, Chorus led the midterm evaluation of HCA1, and we undertook a specific assessment of partnership working, and a lot of valuable lessons were learned from that then fed into the design of phase 2. So how we promote consortium, number one, it's kind of at the core of what our structure is, and through our grant mechanisms. As I said, we only fund consortiums, and we try to put those expectations very clear from the outset before a particular project is even funded. So it's in the application phase where we set out expectations, for example, on their governance structures and how they share financial resources with partners. And more importantly, we really encourage, sharing decision-making, which is really key. So it's not just about resources, it's decision-making. For the HCA2 program, I think consortium can be seen at two different levels. One is at the project delivery, which is the governance I was just mentioning. But then also consortium can be seen at an outcome level, at the city level. So it's also an outcome of the program that we're trying to achieve. And when we're thinking about power dynamics, I think there's really 3 key considerations. One is around who's bringing the money. Who's the donor, and they often have the most power. But then who are the decision makers? And that's, in a lot of these contexts, it's local government, because you can be funding a grassroots NGO organization. If they're working in a silo but don't have those links to government, then successful delivery in terms of sustainability is often not met. And then finally, who are the people that lose out? And that's really interesting for us, because obviously we're a program that works with young people, but young people, they don't have the resources. They often don't have the decision-making power. And so even though they're the focus of the program, they often lose out because they don't have these other things. So that's really important when considering the power dynamics. What are we learning on HCA2 in terms of consortium building? And I'll talk about it at the project level and then as an outcome. At a project level, it's really important that there's clear roles and responsibilities from the outset. And most importantly, that there's a shared agreement for how the consortium is going to work through partnership agreements, for example. There needs to be really good transparency around ways of working, funding, where the money is being spent, and decision making. And even when you have all those things in place, in our instance, the lead partner is still accountable for the funding because we only have a contract with one organization for practicality reasons. So there's still going to be that power dynamic. For example, we have monthly operational calls with our lead partners, and we really encourage them to bring their consortium partners on that call to have a voice. But sometimes logistically that doesn't work. And so there is that imbalance because lead partners ultimately do have the control. So even though we know that all partners should be involved in the calls, the learning, the reporting, that's what we're finding often not always the case, and the lead partner is still controlling that. And so really you have to also have the right lead partner with the right attitude, willingness, and openness to lead a consortium. And sometimes having obviously the experience to do that makes a lot of sense too. Although, pardon me, we're working with a project in Colombia that they might not have the experience, but they have the attitude and willingness. And we're seeing a very successful consortium partnership working there. In terms of consortium as an outcome at the city level, this is where, a consortium, it really needs to be a wide set of city stakeholders. And this is really where you want the local government to be involved. Adolescence is so key in our program, private sector, civil society. But going back to power dynamics, what's really interesting is that you could have all those city stakeholders together and still have issues. So for example, in Senegal, our team leader went down to meet with project leads and the partners, and they convened a meeting with all city stakeholders, including adolescents. But adolescents didn't have a seat at that table. They were the cameramen at the event. They were the photographers, but they weren't sitting and having those discussions. And so at the end, we sat with the project and said, well, how are we going to change that going forward, and really challenged them. And so they've kind of redesigned their project in that way. And so, I think key lessons in terms of successful consortium building, one is that you really have to have this notion from the outset in the project design. And ideally, you co-design this with all partners from the beginning. We're learning that in terms of power dynamics and buy-in, that consortium needs to be built out of a collective understanding of what the needs are and what the solutions can be. And we're actually trialing this new approach in the HCA program through something we're calling a needs assessment and co-design approach, where we're not actually funding a project, but we're funding an organization to facilitate this project, this process, with all partners. And it's in Ecuador, and it's really interesting. And we believe this is going to lead to a more meaningful consortia as an outcome in the end. But we're in the process of learning as we go right now, and we'll certainly generate some interesting evidence around this new approach. Another important lesson is that it takes a lot of time, and you have to invest in early communication and getting to know each other and building trust amongst the partner. It can't be done in a vacuum. And, because it takes so much time, I think donors need to recognize that if we want consortium working, you have to give enough time and space to allow those relationships to develop. And that means funding 3-year project cycles like we have on HCA2 and expecting systemic change isn't always realistic. So donors really need to question themselves, how do you want to do meaningful consortium building? It takes time. Another lesson is that you continually need to build on understanding about the context the consortium is operating in to identify improvements and areas for new ideas. And this is important because consortium working is understood differently in different contexts. For example, one partner thinks it's just about giving money, when actually it's about including others' voices in the decision making. And that really needs to be clear with projects and people from the ground from the outset. And very importantly, you need to develop a culture of learning and openness to challenge existing assumptions, approaches, and solutions. And this is tricky when a donor is involved. People can be afraid to speak up if they think money is on the line. So it's important to encourage an environment and open and honesty. So, for example, if a milestone isn't met, it needs to be clear there's not a punitive measure about that, but it's more about understanding why something hasn't happened. And very importantly, you need to consider regular structured learning reviews with all the stakeholders that include reflection on what needs to change as a result of that lesson. And so all of our projects on HCA2 have quite a rigorous cycle of learning embedded into their project cycles. We set some standards, such as quarterly reflection sessions with their consortium partners and, importantly, adolescents. Though some have really pushed back and said that's too much work to organize due to the need of focusing on our activities. And so you really have to negotiate and discuss with projects what's realistic in terms of that learning and consortium building, and come to a reasonable agreement on it. You have to let activities and relationships evolve organically. So yeah, that was my final point, really. And thanks so much for letting me speak on this.
No, this was just so extraordinary. The very, with clarity, you have really put together several points which are fundamental to consortium building. It is easier said than done. It is a negotiated process, continuous coming back, bringing people together. The word trust is coming all the time. Trust building, getting young people to be at the table, getting them to be involved, participatory processes, doesn't matter young or even, the different kind of actors in the city. On that note, thank you so much. I'm going to ask Oscar if, as a mayor of the city, I know we are going over time. We've got one more speaker who's an academic, who's a co-author with me on the evidence to action. But I would like to bring you, if you do have another few minutes to stay, bring you to, respond to what is emerging as common themes. Oscar, do you have that time, another few minutes to stay? Thank you so much. Very kind of you. So my last speaker, with who's just joined us also, like Catherine, is Dr. Stephanie Butcher. She's a lecturer in the Department of Geography at Sheffield University, UK, and she's the director of the BA Global Sustainable Development Program. Along with myself, as I said, she's the co-author of Fondation Botnar's Evidence to Action Conceptual Framework. Her research interests focus on global development and social justice issues, examining the production of inequalities within urban planning and practice. Stephanie, thank you for running out of your class and making it to your office to join us. You are our last speaker, and then we'll have a couple of people to comment on the overall kind of themes emerging. Can you share with us your thoughts on the significance of bridging the gap between practice and research to activate local organizations? You've heard Catherine speak that. How do we get local organizations to be equitable partners in shaping cities?
So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about something that I think I've been very preoccupied with over the past couple of years in lots of different spaces. And when I thought about this prompt, I was thinking, it's almost a cliche to start with that idea that there is this schism between research and practice. And cliche as it is, I think it's still worth saying and stating that idea, and particularly pointing the finger at some of those conditions and structures that are responsible for reproducing the schism. So from my position in the university, which often feels like a machine explicitly designed to work against these kinds of engaged, co-produced, collaborative, practice-oriented work, it can be a very difficult task. There is a series of barriers that it presents. So, an emphasis on global theory building, for example, rather than these deep contextual studies which look at local histories and cultures, the kind of obvious production of outputs and discourses and styles that are totally inappropriate for practice. He's talking about journal articles here, institutional inefficiencies in setting up equitable, and supporting equitable partnerships. So, similarly, I think to what Catherine's reflecting around funding and disbursement structures, as well as I think more broadly, this kind of undervaluing of engagements and outputs and to a certain extent geographies, which I think don't fit our narrow academic criteria of research excellence. So, I speak from the belly of the beast in a way. But what's, I think, still exciting, to speak from here is that despite these challenges, I think there is still an appetite and an experience of collaborative work, which can help us rupture those schisms. And in doing so, kind of build these alternative pathways across research and practice. So we've heard already, probably many things before I arrived, but I heard already the word co-design. From me, the idea of co-production is really productive. That idea of working across different stakeholders, different kinds of knowledge towards collectively defined defined goals. And most instrumentally, I think the idea of bringing different stakeholders together who have a stake in decision making can help address complex challenges. I think more transformative, we know that valuing the lived experiences, narratives, experiences of those people who are often excluded is a form of epistemic justice and is intrinsically important in of itself when we think about addressing inequalities. So I kind of was thinking about this sort of prompt and thinking I might share a little bit of a story, which is a few years old now, but which is something I always return to because for me is one of the more profound examples of this politics of knowledge. So it takes place in 2015, 2016 in Tanzania. I was working very closely with an organization called Centre for Community Initiatives, locally based NGO that supports residents in informal settlements in advocacy and upgrading, especially around infrastructure. So very much this idea of how do we work in partnership. So at the time we were looking at flooding in riverside settlements in Dar es Salaam, in the capital. So informal neighborhoods located in precarious locations, seasonally experiencing flooding, maybe managing that in a very mundane way, moving to other areas when it happens and moving back, or maybe very profound and devastating as it occurs. So this particular area we were working extremely centrally located, right in the city center, so fantastic access to the rest of the city. Yeah, and this is, I think, in a way, a story that can be repeated in dozens of cities and dozens of places. But what was really interesting for me about this case is in 2011, there was one of these devastating flooding events. The Ministry of Lands, Housing and Human Settlements oversaw a relocation, unfortunately, to a new neighborhood 40 kilometers from the city. So for those who don't know Dar es Salaam, it means very long travel across roads that are very difficult to actually move, several hours from any of these amenities. And ultimately, what was found in 2018, several years later, is that at least half of these residents had moved right back to these precarious locations. So what was interesting in the work that was being done with CCI is looking at the ways in which these residents actually conceptualize themselves risk and adaptation, and how different this might be from the evidence that was being emergent from policy-driven definitions, where land had been considered hazardous, only if it lied within 60 meters of a river. So it's very straightforward definition. So this evidence base of hazard from this policy lens, mobilized through policy technical expertise, made visible through knowledge artifacts such as hazard maps, it told a particular story about risk. And that particular story meant that communities should be at best relocated, at worst we can say evicted, because actually there was lots of issues around who was able to actually access that relocation package. So in contrast, when we explore this with communities, a number of other stories emerge. So residents spoke of the desire to remain in place, but maybe with upgraded infrastructure, maybe focusing on stormwater drainage, better sanitation systems, shoring and damming up the riverbanks to prevent the worst of flooding. When they talked about risk, actually, they talked about the economic and social risk of being very far away from the neighborhoods in which they had currently been living. And they also talked about kind of historic processes, such as the loss of mangroves, which had a natural buffer against the rising stormwaters, the rising water table as a result of heavy construction, the use of concrete, because this was a rapidly urbanizing built-up central area. And as urban development researchers at the time, we were also asking wider questions about the intentions of such a highly strategic, centralized tract of land and what that might actually be used for once informal residents had been evicted, right? So if you looked at city master planning, it was flagged as a strategic area for investment. So I share all of this just to say that I think what these various narratives tell us is that these plots of land, in this case, were not necessarily considered inherently risky, but only became so with a lack of appropriate infrastructure for a particular kind of people. And what we can see is that the evidence around risk is mobilized in different ways and with different political orientations and impacts. So I think we have to ask ourselves then, when we think about research and practice, in areas where you might have very conflicting interpretations of evidence, who gets to define what's vulnerable, what's risky, and what's viable? So ultimately, for me, what this demonstrates is not just the requirement of bridging evidence and practice, of which we know there are many barriers and we know we need to do better, but also the crucial importance of orienting that collaborative knowledge towards building justice. And so even while we have many challenges of bridging this gap, I think there's a lot of different practices that we can think about in how we engage the systems and structures to nurture these partnerships, from framing research around collectively designed understandings of impact. So research is explicitly change-oriented, it's normative, it's designed to support, enhance, extend existing practices, and support, in those first instances, those who are not served by current policy and planning regimes. Investment in learning, we've talked a lot about that already, so I won't expand on it, but financial time, valuing the idea of actually learning for the university, thinking about reclaiming that idea of the university as a site of public good that produces knowledge to confront broader forms of social justice. I think we've lost that sometimes. Nurturing space for co-learning, honesty, uncertainty, ethical reflection, so we can navigate some of these different priorities, values, sensitivities. And finally, claiming a more political orientation. So the intention isn't just to reproduce a neutral evidence base of what's happening in the city, but rather to reveal the vested interests, contested visions, and to support that imagination and proposition of alternative forms of development, which can support ultimately the urban majorities that are living in conditions of precarity. And that's it.
Thank you so much. That was, you're in one line, if you say, it is, if I have to sum it, you're really talking about and challenging all of us on whose evidence counts, whose evidence are we going for, and many times it is the same old voices and the same old, people who come and claim the space. And, whether it is Catherine's consortium building, to return back to get those voices that are not at the space regularly, finding those voices. Juan Carlos talking about, in his work in Safe and Sound, bringing the young people, enabling them, building their capacity as they build evidence. Inclusive, this imperative of inclusion, as I said at that beginning, where you were not there, you articulated so excellently. And I think that is exactly what Kalpana also talked about, that young people and their meaning and their space, their place in society. We need to get that, whose evidence count, is really important. I am mindful that we are over time, and this is one of the most amazing, exciting conversations that I know that tomorrow I will listen to again and feel, wow, I didn't know so many different points. But I'm just so privileged to have brought all of you together in your very, difficult and hectic days. So thank you so much. But on that note, I would like to bring back Oscar, Mayor of Palmyra. We were there very recently, and I saw the work that he was doing with his amazing group of, his team. I would like to bring, Oscar. Oscar, I was going to ask you to share some high-level reflections on what points are resonating with you, with the efforts you have put in Palmyra. What is your advice to the future leaders of intermediary cities? When I was there in Palmyra a month ago, you were saying that you brought together a coalition of intermediary cities, and you are going to be concluding your time in Palmyra as the mayor. So over to you for a few thoughts on these points.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, as I was listening to all of you and the importance of engaging young people in decision-making and making things happen, I, as I said earlier, we have to admit that PASOS, our violence prevention strategy, wasn't something that came up from the people, but it was more of a government strategy that started to be implemented in a sense of a top-down implementation. However, I was thinking of so many examples of how we have nurtured this strategy through what young people and even kids came up with. And I want to show you for a few seconds. I found this video. This is a kid. He's probably like 4 years old. And his mom really looked for me everywhere while we were in the pandemic. I'm sorry, I have this blur thing. It doesn't make it seem okay. And so he wants to be like a TV news anchor, and he wanted to interview me for his program while we were in the pandemic, right? So this kid was really confident kid, really nice. So we engaged him, besides only, of course, giving him an interview for his his TV show, we invited him to participate in some space that we have that is called the Participation Table for Boys, Girls, and Adolescents. And in one of those meetings, he came with a great idea, and he said, "Mayor, the kid is like 4 years old. Mayor, going to the movies is too expensive. Why don't you take the movies to the parks?" And I was like, that is a good idea. We're going to think about it. And then so through one of our social secretaries, we started doing something very simple, like a video beam and a white thing in parks. I mean, it was difficult at first, but now, for example, the thing has grown since that, which is probably 2021, that now we bought a huge inflatable screen, and then we take actually weekly movies to the park through the security secretariat, because we understand that it's much easier also than to be chasing, the people who smoking weed or, through parks. So many things happen in parks. So it's best when you bring social offer, and when you fill the parks with activity, with sports, then the dynamic changes, the families come. And so that is the idea of a 4-year-old kid, which started to be implemented and is now implemented every week in Palmira, which is taking movies to the park. So, and that is something that we have aligned. That is just a little example of what has been on the practice to be able to listen good ideas. Sometimes, I mean, governments, we make everything seem so complex, so expensive, and there's easy ideas to implement that actually can really change the life of so many people. I think also, again, Botnar Foundation and Fundación Despacio, Vivo Mi Calle, has been another excellent way in which we have been able to not only promote the idea of biking, of sustainable mobility, but also engage young people in using this space, in defending this space, because in so many cities, it's so difficult to implement the bike lanes because the people in the cars are very good of complaining in Twitter. So it's very good when you engage young people in these conversations, because they have a stronger presence in social media, and it's things that we're doing for them, but we need to do it with them also. I mean, they need to know that we're doing these things for them. A lot of times in government, we do a lot of things, and we don't really talk to the beneficiaries, to the people who are supposed to make use of the infrastructure or to take a benefit from it. So I believe that is probably my best recommendation. I believe in government, you as a mayor, as a leader, you want to do something, but then people are asking for people want other things, and maybe the data and the analysis and the universities and the hard numbers are telling you that the needs are others. So you need to sort of align those three things. What do you want to do? What is people asking for? And what are the numbers saying that your city needs? Once you align that, it's probably a lot easier to build coalitions and to also get multiple stakeholders to chip in when all that makes sense.
I'll just say that we are so privileged to have each one of you to share this time with us and to contribute to Urban October. I know UN Habitat will be very pleased to have star-studded, contributions. We look forward to continuing our, collaboration with each one of you. Much appreciate your time. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you and bye.